to me, the hook was probably going to be something along the lines of how to inject toilet humor into Final Fantasy. And I think that that's a selling point. I actually think that's like a good thing, right? Because like those games can often take themselves like way too seriously.
So,
Uh,
would you ever reimagine, like you've got, well, lack of a better way of putting it, you have a boring gameplay loop. Would you ever revisit it, make it better, and
yeah,
try again?
I've thought about it. Right, so right after the Kickstarter failed, we advanced to like the second or third round with publishing back and forths with Ubisoft.
Really?
Yeah, and we got um, some feedback, but they were like, "Here's our initial concerns, but we're moving this up the chain, like as it goes." And then we were rejected. But with that feedback, I was like, "Okay, enough is enough. The Kickstarter failed. We're hearing the same kind of thing over and over again. How do we fix this?" And I like busted out some index cards and was like, "Let's break this game down the spine and just try again." And like write out some new cards on some index cards and play it and see what feels fun. It was an interesting exercise, but I think I was too close to like the failure of the Kickstarter. I think I needed to sit for a while before I tried to revisit it again. Um,
That's fair.
yeah.
It's always
Every so
nice in
often,
a couple years to revisit an old project and see, like, oh, this is
yeah,
fun. It's like whenever I
yeah.
play Burgle's Bounty, and oh, this game was pretty fun. When nobody
You
liked it.
know, every so often I have like an idea in the shower where I'm like, oh, that's what we should have done. And it's like now crystal clear, but without distance, it's very difficult to get that perspective.
Interesting. I mean, that's. I mean, for you, I guess it's maybe it's just time. You just or maybe it's a different project.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, let me spin that question. Instead of revisiting Waste Knots, would you ever come back and do your own project again?
maybe. I'm so I'm really interested. So, and this is like maybe a good transition to like what I'm doing now because I am doing some of this stuff. So Akupara is a indie game house for lack of a better term. They do publishing, they do internal development, they also do work for hire.
So can you
And
tell us everything that
I
you're under NDA for right now?
yes, absolutely. So we do primarily like three things. They do publishing of indie games. They do their own game development, like entirely internally, and then they also do work for hire kind of projects as they come up. And I am a producer like on all three of those in various forms. I think I'm on like 6 or 7 games right now. Um, some of mine are I tend to be more of a technical hat. So some of mine where we are publishing the game, I am leading our internal developers to do the port, just to like kind of make sure we're checking all the boxes. I've launched on console before, so like here's going to be the requirements, things like that. We do get to do some kind of fun stuff where we're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we integrated with this feature on like that platform or whatever? But it's typically pretty straightforward. But I want to say 2 of my projects right now are internal development projects, which are being built from the ground up. And actually, they're uh, even though like Akupara is itself a publisher, we are pitching to higher up on the food chain investors for them. Not we would like to publish them internally, but pitching to other investors for bigger budget games. And um, I'm kind of taking over the role of like helping oversee the development of vertical slices and pitch decks and all that kind of stuff. Um, in that role, I have the opportunity to work with game designers. I have the opportunity to work with the programmers and the artists and the audio team and the writers and all that kind of stuff. And so I feel like I am very much involved in these projects, including from obviously not a day-to-day design, but certainly somebody who is like the final arbiter of like, no, this design is or is not good enough, and here's my feedback and things like that. And that's that's kind of nice to be part of a team and not to have to do it all myself.
But wouldn't you want to create your creation or have your own idea come to life?
Not necessarily. I actually, yeah,
Okay.
I'm not, I mean, like I think I'm at my best when somebody has like the big picture idea. I am really enjoying working with like creative directors and being like, and them saying like, here's the vision, here is the global concept, and me being like, we're gonna tweak this thing and that thing, and we're gonna make this more fun and more interesting, and here's my feedback over here, and I that's where my creativity I guess gets to come to play, as opposed to having to be responsible for like, here's my idea and everything that goes into it.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
pretty hard as an indie. You're right. I mean, that's
like
like
I
a
don't
point actually.
I don't
Like,
think
I
anybody,
want my idea, but I want a team to do it for me.
yeah, and I think that listen, probably Stardew Valley is the only game that I can think of where like one person had a good
Literally did it
idea.
all.
Yeah. I think everyone else who has just tried to make a game and not gotten feedback on their design, they've made a bad game. Everyone else in the world.
That's why the indies take them to expos usually, because that's when, quite frankly, the public shits on your stuff pretty hard.
It's true.
They'll lie to you and say, "Oh, it's so fun," but you can just see how they're playing it, and so you can usually tell when someone's engaged or not.
And that's it's like a check engine light, right?
Yeah.
If somebody's like not playing it, but it doesn't give you creativity, like it doesn't give you that feedback of like being in a designer's room with 3 people talking about like what this game should look like, one from a narrative perspective, one from a mechanics perspective. And I think that just there's a reason that most like TV shows have writers' rooms and not writer.
Gary and I actually do that a reasonable amount. Probably not as much as we should. But I really enjoy those sort of brainstorming moments.
Yeah, I think it's really.
I would love it if Gary lived in New York and we could get together like every day.
I know, man. We came up with a lot of good ideas when I was in town. The other year.
Everything, all of them made it into the game.
That's the way to do it, and like that's where you get your best ideas, right? So I'm really privileged to. One of the game designers I'm working with right now is in London. And so I'm really privileged to just like wake up every morning and see what all of like the new design is for like this vertical slice. And I'm like, oh, cool. I get to just like see new game design and like comment on it and have that kind of back and forth.
Somebody else does the design. I tear it apart.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, no, truly, it's an exercise. I'm obviously looking at it from much more of a questions of scope, of technical capabilities, of a little bit of marketing, right? So if I see something where I'm like, hey, if we just add this, then like Nintendo will feature us or something, right? From the perspective, a vertical slice that we're currently drafting had a lot of like branching paths of like options of ways that you can solve a puzzle. And I'm like, this is a vertical slice, it's 10 minutes, an investor's going to play it once, and I'm not making a ton of content for that they're not going to see. And so the solution is just make them all required. Like all these branches are now, you can do them in any order, but they're required. And those kinds of back and forth, I think having different lenses to approach a single game is critical that you're looking at. And from an indie perspective, when you're by yourself, when I was by myself, I had to look at my games through all of those lenses by myself. I had to sit down and say, I'm just looking at this game from a design perspective. And now tomorrow, I'm just looking at it from a business perspective. And now the next day, I'm just looking at it from a narrative cohesion perspective. And that can get exhausting.
You see, that
sounds exhausting to do a context switch like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that is exhausting. I don't know if I do that quite. I definitely don't do it every day or every other day because
it's impossible.
Often I'm in the weeds actually making the thing.
Yeah.
But I sometimes find myself losing it. It's like, is this any good?
Right.
And then I will every now and then whenever I do a build, like once every 2 months, and actually play through it and fix all the bugs. Like, oh, this is fun. Okay, this needs to be changed. There's a problem here. Or but I still think this game is going to have a market. Now I could be lying to myself. I need someone else to tell me that.
You need to pitch it to a bunch of publishers and have them all tell you that simultaneously.
I don't feel like I'm ready. Like I think it's a good advice. I just don't think it's ready yet.
I will say, for Wastelands, we pitched to publishers very early, and all the games that come into me where I'm like, yes, I'm like, these are realistically like within a year of launch. It's rare that a game that's further out than that. I mean, it has happened where I've seen a game that's like planned launch like 2024, and I'm like, but it's really good. But it's pretty rare, and by and large, it's like, okay, now I have enough to see it where I'm like, I get the idea, and I'm excited for it. It needs to be about a year, 18 months maybe.
Okay, Dean, can I put you on the spot?
Okay.
You played the Kids of Carindale demo. It was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay. So go from those memories. How well do you remember it?
Okay.
Tell us what you thought. Be brutally honest.
All right. So I'll put on my publisher hat here, and look at it from the lens of, do I think that there is do we sell this game? Like, how does this fit, within the market and stuff like that? My immediate impression is that selling it based on screenshots is going to be tough, because I don't think that there's a artistic point of view that is sellable on its own. I think that the hook, like if I was, somebody who's going to say, okay, how am I going to market this? How am I going to get press attention?
Mm-hmm.
To me, the hook was probably going to be something along the lines of how to inject toilet humor into Final Fantasy. And I think that that's a selling point. I actually think that's like a good thing, right? Because those games can often take themselves like way too seriously. And so there's a blend here that is kind of interesting. And that's probably like the headline that you end up pitching to press. I thought the combat was solid. It didn't necessarily innovate, but it didn't feel like it needed to. But also, I played the tutorial, so it I'm sure it opens up later.
There's a lot more that's there's still a lot more that needs to be done on that. And there's been a lot that's been done since you played it too.
I'm sure. And when you're playing a tutorial, it's like, okay, here's like your one option, right? And I'm trying to think if there's any other things. Yeah, that was kind of that. The main thing that I would have been concerned about was the visual presentation. How do we sell this as a visual thing? But again, and I think I mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of successful ugly games. And I'm not saying your game is ugly. I'm not saying when I say ugly games, I mean not artist-driven games. Slay the Spire isn't ugly. It's not particularly great art, right? It's not like they have a team of 30 artists that were doing it. It's fine. It's serviceable. It's totally okay art. That's the same way that I felt about Wastenauts. And in terms
I actually like the style of Wastenauts.
I like the comic style, and I like the illustrations, but I didn't like the juice, the game feel, the visual polish that we had. We didn't have that, and it felt like in instances messy or things like that. And so when I look at those games, it's like, hell, look at how Kit Fox treats Boyfriend Dungeon, which has...
I don't know those games.
Oh my god, Boyfriend Dungeon. So Kit Fox, the publisher. Boyfriend Dungeon is a roguelike dungeon crawler where you can date your weapons. So it's a dating simulator as well. And they have their community manager used to be Victoria Tran, who's now at social game Among Us, and was really, really, really effective at managing the community. Blue Up is now going to be hosting the Indie Game Awards, or IGF, and is generally considered one of the best indie game community manager promoter people around. One of their games is Boyfriend Dungeon. and it's got these amazing like anime style characters and like their thirst traps and all that kind of stuff, and they're great and they're visual and you love them, and you see a screenshot and you're like, I want to read more. And that shit was on Twitter nonstop. They are also publishing a remake, I think of like a full remake of Dwarven Fortress, and that game's ugly. Right, Dwarven Fortress used to be ASCII art. And they're doing a remake, but it's not particularly like visually that much more attractive. They are not nearly as much active in terms of Twitter. It's much more focused on things like dev blogs to explore like your favorite features from the old one that we're bringing into the new one and things like that, because they don't need to, like, they're not screenshot driven. And so that game has like such a massive following, it's going to do 10 times better than Boyfriend Dungeon. So I think the question is similar for Kids of Carindale, is how do you sell this game without like avenues that are not visually driven? I think a dev blog. Like a really
I do a dev blog, but I haven't posted to it since we started podcasting. I thought this could kind of operate.
Yeah, you could use the podcast as a dev blog kind of thing.
We are going to do more of those featured episodes, but we can't do that every time because there's not enough new information to give every time.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there's any others. I would be interested in seeing comps, or what y'all thought were comps. But I would also want to do my own research on actual indie RPGs that are in development.
So it's probably not useful unless you've seen it, but Chained Echoes, because that's the game I find myself constantly comparing Kids of Carindale to.
Look it up.
There are aspects of that game that are visually impressive, but it's not all around. I feel like the trailer shows the best looking parts of the game, and then everything else is kind of on par or maybe a little bit more bland than Carindale. I don't know. That's my opinion. I could be biased. I'm sure I'm biased.
Yeah, it's the same kind of, we're getting a lot of I think there's going to end up being more of a pushback on kind of pixel art for pixel art's sake, especially from consoles, is my understanding. This is all like second and third hand. But and this, seems the same way. I would kind of have the same feedback here, where I would be like, what's the visual story here? Like, what are we trying to do that's like, as compared to, if we're looking at like JRPGs or something like that, as compared to Octopath Traveler. Traveler,
I did not like Octopath Traveler.
I struggled. I don't think that I made it more than halfway. I think I barely unlocked all the characters. Yeah. I don't think mechanically it was interesting, but
no, the battle system was boring. I actually didn't like the visuals. Actually, the random fight frequency is far too high. The combat took far too long to finish. It wasn't fun enough, and visually, the blur effect, the bloom effect that they overused everywhere, hurt my eyes.
But it made such for such amazing screenshots. It made for such an amazing trailer, and
you're right.
And it had a clear artistic. It had something to say visually, not just like, we're doing
2D sprites on a somewhat 3D environment with a lot of blur.
It had something to say. And I think, when I is kind of the same, with Chained Echoes and others. These games are perfectly serviceable pixel art. I think Kids of Carindale also is like totally fine when it comes to pixel art, but it doesn't have something to say visually.
I'm not. You're right. There isn't that extra oomph, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm probably, and I actually was thinking about this like today when I was in the shower.
It's the best time for game dev.
Yeah, I was. It's like, because I was specifically thinking about the overworld, and it's like there needs to be more there. It's not polished enough, because I actually went through recently and actually redid a lot of the parallax effects to make them nicer. Because I'm especially using this forest area in the game as this fog rolls in. So one scene there's a little bit of fog, and the next scene there's more fog, and it's multi-layered, and it's moving around, and it's supposed to look kind of cool. And the scene's kind of dark though too, because a lot of areas, there are areas of the game that are pretty dark, and maybe that is a bit of a problem, but that was intentional because I wanted to make it seem like it would actually be. Anyway, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
But
No, I think
it,
that there's stuff that you can do, but also I think more to the point is like understand who, like, what is your selling point, and then who's going to be comfortable with that. So,
so yeah.
when we talked about, and I said, toilet humor in Final Fantasy, the first publisher that comes to mind is Adult Swim, right? Like, there's going to be people who know how to market that, and there's going to be people who have no idea.
Yeah.
I mentioned Serenity Forge earlier. They're not going to know what to do with this game because it's very much like not in their wheelhouse of that demographic of who to market to. And I think that's where you start, rather than trying to like do everything, like rather than like you're sitting here talking about like, I'm going to do this for the art, that for the art. I'm like, fuck it. It doesn't need that. Just figure out what is cool about your game and then lean into that.
Well, I pitched Burgle's Bounty to Adult Swim. I've never heard back from them, though, because there was some adult humor in Burgle's Bounty. Most of my games kind of have that spin to
it. Yeah, why is that there?
It's my sense of humor.
Yeah, I think knowing like where it fits in somebody's like portfolio, and if they know the demographic, is going to be really important as well.
So this has been some phenomenal advice, and I don't even know if I want to ask the last question, because it is, what kind of advice would you give someone? Okay, let's take a spin on that question. What advice would you give yourself now, going back when you first started on Vidar?
Oh boy, get it out faster. Whatever you're working on, do it faster. Do it in half the time. It is more important to have people in your corner than it is to knock it out of the park in the first instance. And it is more likely you will knock it out of the park the more people you have in your corner. And the only way to get those people is by having a goddamn game out there, or several. So whatever it is, just release it. Just go.
Do you think that maybe that's because when it comes to indies, it's also about what they want to achieve out of it, because not all of them are doing it for money. I mean, obviously, a lot of them are because they want to live off of it, but maybe they're not expecting to get rich. So
my advice is totally useless for people who are.
You've got very good business advice. So it's like, how do I survive at this?
How do you? Yes. Is put it out earlier, whatever it is, and inherently by going through that process just over and over. Like, I spent 3 or 4 years on, or I spent 3 years on Wastelands. I spent 2 and change on Vidar. If each of those could have been cut down, or I mean, in all honesty, I was able to get that experience by releasing other games that I was working with, like where I was acting as a producer. But I would have just had like more, right? Even when I applied for this job at Akubara, I applied for a lot of other producer jobs. It was the first time I was actually like applying for a job in the games industry. I had no idea what to expect. Akubara was the only one who even gave me an interview, because I didn't have nearly enough games under my belt, and so nobody was really taking me seriously. And it's just, I happened to know Akubara from pitching them Wastelands, and we had gotten so close. Like they were one of the publishers that we got like the closest to, and just get it out earlier. Just get it out, whatever it is.
Carindale is going to be a few years yet, so that's good advice. Probably not to Gary and I.
Like if you could do it episodically, if you could do something else in the meantime, if you could just like,
with what time?
Yeah, I know. It's impossible when you're working a full-time job. But any success that I have had in this industry, which has been pretty minimal, let's be real, I have gotten from being in the same room as other people. And to do that, you have to have a game.
You do.
Yeah, you have to have a game. Like that's the ticket of admission, to get in. the price of admission.
All right. Gary, you have anything else you want to ask Dean?
I guess I had one question. It was like, what do you imagine your dream project to be?
Oh boy.
Let's say that time, money wasn't an issue, and not even like IP was an issue. Like you can work with an IP you want, whether it be like somebody else's or your own.
Boy. Oh boy. I will say, so I literally can't talk about like anything beyond the fact that I'm doing a pitch right now that involves a popular IP. And it has been really fun to play with, to explore someone else's world and be like, here's the stuff that I want out of this. And get to create in like somebody else's universe. And I am a huge X-Men nerd, like a massive X-Men nerd. I would love to do a project in that universe. Like I would kill for that. So far, I have been very underwhelmed with basically every game that, like Marvel tie-in games that come out.
There's been a couple good X-Men games have come out. No, I haven't played anything recently, but
I think recently they did the Marvel like Legends 3 or something for Switch. I didn't even go to because it got so panned. I do play Marvel Puzzle Quest on my phone, and I love it. It's a match 3 in Marvel, and it's so far the best Marvel game I've played. I would kill to do some kind of X-Men game. I would kill to do an X-Men MMO.
So much for small projects.
I know. No, only big, only good.
Hey, my question wasn't centered around small or big.
Yeah. No, I would. I do really love like finding hooks where I'm like, oh, what if? Like, what if we pulled at this a little bit more?
Awesome. All right, Dean. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thanks.
Hopefully, you can help us get some more subscribers with that handsome face of yours.
As always.
You're only using him for his body.
Yeah, it would be the first time.
Well, what else would I use him for? His good game development advice.
Yeah, who has that, right?
All right, Dean, thank you so much again for joining us. And it was great hanging out, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
We'll finally get together in person soon.
Absolutely. And have fun on the next session with my former boss.
We'll ask him about you.
On Zelda Singularity. Oh boy. All right.
All right, Dean, thanks a lot and take care. Thanks for listening to part 3 of our conversation with Dean. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Next up is one of the themes for Kids of Carindale's main villain.